Tonight at 10:30 on ITV in Midweek Sports Special, there's football, boxing, and an exclusive interview with Terry Venables, who'll emulate Liverpool's triumph in last season's Milk Cup final. Tonight we're at the City Ground for Nottingham Forest's game against Portsmouth. And from Shoreditch, boxing. Sylvester Meaty meets Nigeria's Fighting Romanos for the Commonwealth welterweight title, and Bevan Bailey takes on Dennis Andreas for the British light heavyweight title. Brian Moore introduces Midweek Sports Special, ITV tonight at 10:30.
This is Thames from London. The local headlines follows the world news now from ITN at 10.
Mr. Scargill and the NUM fined for contempt of court. The Tories propose life for drug pushers. Alan Lake, Diana Dawes' widower, shoots himself. Oxfam launches a campaign for 1 million volunteers. And how to have fun learning science. Good evening. Mr. Scargill tonight insisted that the NUM strike is official and will continue, even though he and his union have both been fined today for saying just that. The High Court in London imposed a fine of £1,000 on Mr. Scargill personally, with 28 days to pay, and a fine of £200,000 on the National Union of Mine Workers. The union has 14 days to pay. Both also have until next Monday, before the fines come into force, to give them an opportunity to change their attitude. Mr. Justice Nichols said willful disobedience had been committed by a large and powerful trade union bent on saying it's untouchable. If court orders are seen to be set at naught, he said, where is the rule of law? At NUM headquarters, Mr. Scargill gave his response.
The union will continue to do all in its power to win maximum support for the strike and reaffirms that there should be no crossing of official picket lines.
So the miners' president tonight not having been sent to Pentonville, but still exuding defiance by reading out exactly the same statement that had brought him into contempt. As with past hearings, he'd not attended court in the morning, nor was the union legally represented. Outside, a petition with 500 signatures, among them Tony Benn and Ken Livingstone, all saying they wanted to be in contempt with Mr. Scargill. But the petition never got to Mr. Justice Nichols. In court, the judge said statements by the union and Mr. Scargill last week in Blackpool that the strike was still official, in defiance of the court's order that it was unlawful, were a clear contempt of the court. He said the NUM knew exactly what it was doing. Although the NUM leaders had deeply held views about the strike which are to be respected, the judge went on, I am driven to the conclusion that the president sought deliberately and repeatedly to negate the purposes of the order. I would be failing in my duty to uphold the law if I did not recognise such conduct. The judge said he'd give the union till Monday to come to the court. If not, the fines would be enforced. After the judgment, one of the 2 Yorkshire miners who brought the case said he was happy the law had been upheld, but unhappy he'd had to take his own union to court.
We didn't go through what we've gone through with the law, with the ruling, to get the ruling, for Mr. Scargill just to turn around and say I ain't taking no notice of it. He's got to be seen to take notice of the law of the land.
But he won't.
Well, then he must suffer the consequences.
And that means going to prison?
I'm not the judge. I'm just the chap that's asking for the ballot, that's all.
The first reaction from the NUM came from Vice President Mick McGahey in London.
My goodness. They must think we've got all that money.
Yes.
You can't take the breech off a Highlandman. I don't think Arthur's got any either.
And what about the union itself? What about 200,000?
Oh, we're skint.
4 hours later, Mr. Scargill came out of his Sheffield office to read the statement that had landed him in court in the first place yet again.
This means that the strike action in the British coalfield is official, in accordance with National Rule 41. The union will continue to do all in its power to win maximum support for the strike and reaffirms that there should be no crossing of official picket lines. This official strike action will continue until the National Coal Board withdraws its pit closure programme, agrees to keep open those pits currently under threat, and provides a basis for resolving this dispute in line with Plan for Coal. Signed, National Coordinating Committee, National Union of Mine Workers.
A clear indication that neither Mr. Scargill or the union intend to pay the fine voluntarily. If they don't, like the NGA in the Eddie Shah case, the union's assets will be sequestered and Mr. Scargill's personal bank account or other assets like his car could be seized too. At about this time last year, the NUM nationally was thought to have about £9 million. That's probably been halved by the expenses of the strike. Although what's left easily covers the 200,000, the problem is that if the union doesn't purge its contempt, it could, like the NGA, face fine after fine, eventually leading to bankruptcy. That could be added to by the news tonight that a group of miners intends suing their union for loss of earnings. Although today's events cast something of a shadow over tomorrow's resumed peace talks at ACAS, the threat of massive fines must put extra pressure on all sides to make a big effort to try to make them successful.
The Haldane Society of Socialist Lawyers said the judge had disregarded the interests of 54,000 striking Yorkshire miners in favour of 40 who were working. And the Labour QC, Lord Gifford, joined 3 other barristers to say the court action was a misuse of the law for political reasons. Lord Gifford spoke on ITN's Channel 4 News.
I'm accusing the judiciary of exercising their discretion in a way which comes down always, almost invariably, on the side of the employer against the worker. There is this principle which says you have a discretion. And when something has been going on for 7 months, it really is ridiculous to declare it somehow to be outlawed. And to anybody who says, in the words of the order which I have in front of me, to declare it as official or anything to the like effect is breaking the law and then liable to jail and fines. We really are not in the real world.
Labour and Conservative members have fought in the European Parliament over a miners' banner. Labour were protesting that there'd been no debate on the British miners' strike. Conservatives, already angry about a £1,000 collection for British miners in Strasbourg, ran forward when a Welsh Euro MP, Mr Llewellyn Smith, produced the banner from his briefcase. There were struggles as French and German Conservatives called the Labour members fascists.
To you, Mr President, we've even brought the treasured emblem of the South Wales miners into this chamber, and we've done that because that's how strongly we feel about the issue.
If this is what happens here, can you imagine the sustained violence, the sustained intimidation, the sustained bloody-minded totalitarianism, which is a motivation behind what has been happening here?
Britain's 4th biggest union is to continue to give funds to the Mine Workers Union because a move to stop the money just failed to get a 2/3 majority. The local government union NALGO had called a special conference to consider the emergency resolution. So far they've donated £35,000 from national funds to the miners. The Director General of the CBI, Sir Terence Beckett, has accused church leaders who've spoken on the miners' strike of generating feeling in favour of a settlement on the wrong terms. He said the rest of industry had to adapt to a changing world with nothing like the terms being offered to the miners. The government is to take tougher action against drug traffickers. Under proposed new laws, they'll face a maximum penalty of life imprisonment. The Health Minister, Mr Kenneth Clarke, told the Conservative Party conference in Brighton the government would spend an extra £5 million on prevention, treatment and rehabilitation of drug users. There'll be new guidelines for doctors treating drug addicts, prosecution for the sale of glue-sniffing kits, and 100 extra customs staff and special drug squads in all Britain's police forces.
Like the other parties, the Conservative Conference have woken up to the problem of drug abuse this year. They've talked of addict numbers doubled in 3 years, rampant drug profiteering, and drug taking that even affects tiny babies.
When babies are now being born with a craving for drugs because they are the children of junkie mothers, the time has come for the government to act.
And when you've actually seen youngsters of 15 and 16 embark on a life of crime and prostitution, you will agree with me and our research group that action needs to be taken and needs to be taken now.
I'm now delighted.
The government's job, the Health Minister told the Conservatives, was to nail the drug traffickers and hit them hard. The Home Secretary would bring in a bill to raise the maximum penalty for trafficking to life imprisonment.
The drug evil must be and can be beaten. We cannot have our society, our free society, our open society, our pleasant society, living under the threat of such a dangerous trade. The fear, the despair must be lifted from where it lies at the moment and put on the shoulders of those to whom it ought to belong. There should be fear on the part of those who trade in drugs, fear of the action which this government, at the exhortation of this party, is proposing to take.
Just down the promenade from the conference, rock star and former heroin addict Pete Townsend was guest speaker at a young Conservative fringe meeting, delivering a personal warning on the dangers of drug abuse. Townsend was lead guitarist with The Who. In 20 years at the top of the music industry, he earned a reputation as one of the wild men of rock. This was his public image. Privately, he says depression led him to experiment with heroin. It almost cost his life.
I smoked heroin once, alone, quite calmly, in the middle of the day. I was not sick. I felt wonderful. I'm a fast learner. I was addicted.
Townsend says specialist treatment in America saved his life. Other addicts weren't so lucky.
I've survived. A lot of my friends didn't. But the drummer in The Who is dead. Jimi Hendrix is dead. Brian Jones is dead. Janis Joplin is dead. They had careers of between 5 and 10 years, if they were lucky.
The musician now plans to continue his crusade against heroin by making a series of films for the Department of Health, warning young people about the dangers of experimenting with drugs. Paul Davis, News at 10, Brighton.
The Chancellor, Mr. Nigel Lawson, has blamed the slump in Britain's growth this year on the miners' strike. He told the Conservative Party conference that because of the dispute, growth would not match last year's 3%. And the Defence Secretary, Mr. Michael Heseltine, was applauded when he said Mrs. Thatcher was absolutely right to order the sinking of the Belgrano, and deserved credit for it.
The Defence Secretary, Michael Heseltine, went out of his way today to defend the Prime Minister over the sinking of the General Belgrano. Labour and the Alliance feel she's left many questions unanswered. Mr. Heseltine disagrees.
The evidence was overwhelming, the advice categoric, the counter-arguments non-existent. The War Cabinet's agreement was immediate, and any other decision would have been unforgivable. And I say to all those pursuing this detailed questioning for incidental information that they should address the central responsibility. The Prime Minister had to protect the lives of our servicemen. Let them tell us where they stand on that issue. The Prime Minister took the right decision, she took it at the right time, and she deserves the credit for what she did.
Outside, Monsignor Bruce Kent led a CND protest against the Trident missile, but Mr. Heseltine called it an insurance policy no responsible government would abandon.
The economic debate this afternoon was the story of the dog that didn't bark. Up to the rostrum went a procession of loyalists to proclaim the successes of the government's economic policy. Missing from the debate, as it's been missing too from fringe meetings at this conference, was any criticism by the wets of the government's handling of unemployment. Maybe they're constrained by the miners' strike. At all events, the Chancellor, Nigel Lawson, had things all his own way.
The main cause of high unemployment in Britain today, and it's much the same in the rest of Europe, is the determination of monopolistic trade unions to insist on levels of pay that price men out of work altogether. And some of them, I have to say, not content with pricing men out of work, do their best to strike them out of work too.
The health debate which followed was a great deal more lively. Several speakers wanted to know why so much money in the NHS was being spent on administration.
Don't reorganise the health service yet again, reform it. Appoint a chairman. I mean the Sir Michael Edwards McGregor type.
How would you like it, Minister, if you were living on your own
old, infirm. Heaven forbid that this happens to you. And your district nurse told you that you could only have a bath once a month.
Mr. Fowler claimed the health service was providing more care than ever before.
So when I see Labour Party banners proclaiming "Save our health service," I say to Kinnock and Company, it is not your health service. The health service does not belong to the Labour Party. The health service does not belong to the trade unions. And least of all, does the health service belong to those who put picket lines around hospitals and take strike action against patients.
The Tories had their first glimpse in Brighton today of Mrs. Thatcher's new glasses. All the better to see the economic upturn with? David Walter, News at 10, Brighton.
Alan Lake, who was married to Diana Dawes for 16 years, shot himself today, 5 months after her funeral. He had said he couldn't face life without her. A report in part 2. And in Bristol, they're teaching the kids that science can be fun. That's in a couple of minutes.
Now, a rather special airline flies direct to Los Angeles in the South Pacific.
An airline in American Magazine is voted best airline 2 years running, but it's not American.
An airline that came top in a British survey on business travel, but it's not British.
An airline that serves all meals on China, but is not from Far East.
An airline that serves all major cities in Australia and New Zealand, but it's not Australian.
An airline that moved one travel writer to describe it as the Ritz of the skies. Air New Zealand. If you can find a more civilized way to start a holiday or a business trip, we'll eat our hat.
Wake up, Watkins. Choosing a computer for the office is a piece of cake.
Obsolescence is a four-letter word for us, Mac.
Go for the big boys in business computers. Can't go wrong.
We're into innovation like there was no tomorrow.
Tried and tested, huh?
Compaq believe their computer simply works better. Before you do the spade work, ask your dealer why.
Only beautiful vegetables are allowed in the Bird's Eye Country Club. Only firm, trim sprouts. Only smaller, sweeter peas. Only bright, young carrots. Only the best can join the Bird's Eye Country Club.
We're sorry, so sorry.
With BUPA, it's reassuring to know that should you fall ill and need treatment, you can stay in a private room with all the comforts of home. You'll have the peace of mind of knowing you can afford to go into hospital at a time to suit you, perhaps in one of BUPA's own modern, well-equipped hospitals. Find out more with this new simple guide. For your free copy, write to BUPA or call 01200 0200 now. BUPA. It really does make all the difference.
Antaeus, a reflection of strength and sensitivity. Antaeus, the new men's fragrance from Chanel. Antaeus, the myth becomes a man today.
Alan Lake, the husband of the late Diana Dawes, has shot himself dead at his home in Berkshire. Today was the anniversary of his first meeting with his wife 17 years ago. He had said that he was dreading it. Diana Dawes died in May after losing a 2-year battle against cancer. Mr. Lake said he had carried on only for the sake of their son, Jason.
They said in 1968 when they married it would never last. She was marrying for the 3rd time. He had a fierce reputation for drinking and wild living. He was sentenced to 18 months in jail for wounding a pub manager. He was an alcoholic, but Diana stood by him and eventually reformed him completely. In 1975, their son Jason was born. The marriage became a show business legend of strength and respectability. These were the best years of Alan Lake's life. And then in May this year, tragedy. Diana was dead. He was completely devastated. The house that had been full of happy memories for 17 years, he told friends, was now a sad place. Last week he put it on the market for £135,000. The depression was deepening.
He was sat on the stairs, and I told him to go and put some rouge on his face. He looked so pale. And he said he had a lot of problems, and I said, oh, all your problems are big, so you say. And then I was sat in the kitchen, and next thing I heard was this bang.
He'd said before in conversation that he wanted to join Diana. He'd also said before that his life finished when she died, and he felt there was nothing for him left. And although he loved Jason, personally, he felt that there was nothing for him anymore without her.
One of his last television roles was as a lovable rogue.
Ever touched. Fake. Fake! This gallery is counterfeiting art!
Now, move on, you two, or you'll make me sorry I'm Irish.
Yes, well, I'm Welsh, if you please. I'm not moving one step until we've had a word with the criminal inside!
Alan Lake was a man never far from sadness. When the greatest happiness he had known was gone, he saw only a future that was not worth having.